quick overview, we'll be talking about the problem of child hunger in Washington. We'll be talking about our work and our projects, some of the recommendations that we left behind in Seattle, and some of the guiding principles that seem to emerge along the way. So, very briefly, child hunger in Washington is the 15th hungriest state in the country, and 1 in 4 kids are food insecure. And so we've touched upon a few child nutrition programs, school breakfast, after-school meals, and along with those, the school lunch program, kids rely on these during the school year for their nutrition needs. But it poses this question of what do they do during the summer months when school lets out? And as Hannah pointed out, the summer meals program is meant to fill this gap. But unfortunately, across the country, and especially in Washington, that gap is not being filled very well.
In Washington, the participation rate of the summer meals program is just 10%, which means that only 1 in 10 low-income youth are accessing this program. And that puts Washington at 40th in the country in summer meals participation. And why is that? There are a few barriers that were identified. One of them is low awareness among families of the program, site location and transportation, lack of trust and credibility, safety concerns, as well as cultural and language barriers.
Right. So Sydney and my work seeks to address some of these barriers. And so my work was sort of at 2 levels, focusing on King County, which is where Seattle is located. First, looking at it at the collaboration level, talking about strengthening collaborations and using a tool called Collective Impact to look at collaborations. And finally, evaluating summer meals in King County. You'll hear about those in a few minutes.
And the scope of my work was statewide, and today I'll be presenting my analysis around organizational structure, strategic partnerships, as well as staffing models to support the summer meals program. Here are some counties, both rural and urban, that are my work focuses on, and each community has its own unique challenges as well as opportunities. And through my conversations with folks throughout the state who are working on the program, advocates, local partners, as well as folks throughout the country who are doing good work around summer meals, I identified 5 opportunities for growth for the program in Washington, which include funding, collaboration, coordination, local cohesion, and community engagement. It's no surprise that funding is a barrier to both starting and maintaining an effective summer meals program. And in addition to looking for new funders, funders should also consider investing in startup costs, transportation, as well as enrichment programs to support the summer meals program. Our next area of growth is collaboration. As we all know, childhood hunger is a very complex issue, and this requires many different partners to be at the table. This is our existing summer meals work group. It's a statewide work group that meets monthly to talk about how they can all work together to increase summer meals participation in Washington. And while there's many great partners here, including the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, who administers the program at the state level, we also need new partners. And these new partners can add new capacity, new leadership, as well as new relationships and networks to better connect with families so that they can be better aware of the program. Our next area of growth is coordination. In order to make the best use of these new partnerships, there needs to be more clarity around roles and responsibilities of each new partner. And a summer meals strategic plan, which is an idea we borrowed from Partners for a Hunger-Free Oregon, can offer this direction around planning and goal setting for our work group. And as an example I'd like to highlight is around site recruitment and program expansion. If our state agency, OSPI, is connecting with eligible schools around encouraging them to adopt the program, they can also coordinate with advocates so that advocates can connect with elected officials and local partners in that community to ensure that there's really strong support for the program. Our next area of growth is local cohesion. Of course, we need really strong local champions to make sure that there's coordination between sponsors to reduce competition, to make sure they can measure progress around increasing participation in the program. And our last area of growth, and one of the most important, is community engagement. Through my talks with folks throughout the state, throughout the country, I noticed there was a real lack of focus on feedback from families about the program and about their needs. And ultimately, we're missing information about families' needs for the program. And the question we should be asking is, who aren't we reaching? And, you know, now more than ever, this community engagement piece is very critical to having a successful summer meals program. Nationally, 46% of today's youth are youth of color. And this community engagement piece will, number one, ensure that the program is more effective, that it's more accountable to the families that it should be serving, and allows them to have a say in what the program looks like, so that they'll be more engaged in participating. And second, it also ensures that the program is more sustainable in the long run when it's serving more families. And what does this look like? It means that we need formal means of feedback and engagement. Of course, we need more outreach to ensure that families are aware of the program, but at the site level, it means that we have staffing, that the community trusts, that reflects the community. It means that there's more data collection. At the community level, there needs to be stronger relationships with schools so that we can reach more eligible families and students. And lastly, we also need to make sure that families and youth are engaged in the program planning so that the program can be relevant to them. These are the broad recommendations that I left behind in Washington, and these also assume that advocates and community partners will be adopting a new approach to how they do this work. And Albert will be talking about that approach.
So, as Sydney said, how can we help adopt this approach? So my work takes Sydney's state-level analysis and really builds on it and gives a more granular look in King County. So sort of at two levels, collaborations, and also at the program level through summer meals. And so one of the largest pieces of my work was interviewing and surveying over 50 anti-hunger leaders throughout King County, asking them what challenges they were facing in terms of implementing the work at an organization as well as collaboration level. Many of these may seem familiar. We've been hearing these a lot, and Sydney touched upon many of these in her portion. And so if I could briefly summarize, there are some practical limitations like organizations are stretched thin, a lack of time, but also relates to funding and communication both internally and externally, and something about resources, processes, or tools to help improve the work. So if we're thinking about solutions and how to improve, it's simple, right? We just focus on these three things. Well, it's not quite that simple, of course. We know where we need to go, but the question is, how do we get there? And so one way we might get there is through something called the collective impact model. This is a framework. To summarize, this is the formal definition, but it's a structured form of collaboration that organizations from different sectors can use to improve the work by committing to a common agenda. And so where does the structure come from? Well, there are 5 components. They're listed here, and you may be reading these and thinking, well, these seem pretty intuitive. At least that was my first reaction. And it's true, they're pretty intuitive. And secondly, I want to say that these are not new ideas. A lot of organizations are already doing these things. It's why folks collaborate. But the difference is the commitment and the scale to which this operates. If we're thinking about hunger and child hunger on a societal level, we need to, it's important for every collaboration and every organization to have these things in mind. I also want to say this is not a checklist. We're not going to go down the list and say, okay, are we doing these, and we're doing collective impacts now. It's more useful to think of these as guiding principles to which collaborations might aspire to really help the work along. So if we take a look at the existing constellation of some of the work groups and things in King County, representing various strategies like child nutrition and emergency food, and if we sort of run them through this collective impact machine and apply some of these principles, it may look something like this. And so immediately it looks neat, it looks organized, there's horizontal and vertical integration, and I think that the output would help reflect this sort of neatness. And so greater accountability, both horizontally and vertically. A steering committee made up of representatives from each of these groups to provide that guiding vision. And lastly, a backbone support organization, which I'll look at in a little more detail. And so backbone support can help provide some of the support to the collaboration in and of itself. It's sort of a dedicated staff whose daily job it is to ensure the health of this collaboration. So the top two here sort of speaks to that, the internal work being done. And then the bottom three are more external responsibilities of the backbone support organization: building public will, advancing policy, and mobilizing funding. So if we think about collaborations happening sort of on an intermittent, as-needed basis, a backbone support organization can help fill those gaps by focusing on them on a more full-time basis. It's worth asking who's missing from this picture. Funders will be essential to help lift this initiative off the ground. If hunger is a complex problem and sort of a symptom or an effect of poverty, it'll be important to embed that approach in terms of this initiative. And lastly, community voices. Moving beyond a place of inclusivity and participation to really prioritize a sense of leadership from the community where these programs are needed. So that was collective impacts, and I want to talk about summer meals work in King County, sort of as a case study of how shared measurement can operate and how we can use shared measurement to help improve the work being done. So United Way's role was a few things, but one thing that we really did was we looked at data and tried to figure out how we can use existing knowledge to have a better understanding of what was going on the ground in a more granular way. So here's a fact sheet that I developed. And so what data did we use? Well, we knew where sites were located geographically, and we knew how many meals each site was serving throughout the summer, and we knew how many days each of them were open. So by combining those sort of three simple things, we placed sites in geographical boundaries, so for instance in school district boundaries, and we were able to get a sense of how many kids were being served by sites by combining the daily average of how many meals were being served at sites to get a better sense of how many eligible kids were using these programs. So we knew that in Washington, 1 in 10 kids are using summer meals. In Renton School District, for example, 8% are using it on an average day last summer. So why are we focusing on schools? Why are schools important in summer meals? Well, two reasons. One, we know that schools are the preferred site. We know that anecdotally from focus groups and from talking to sponsors. If credibility and trust are important in summer meals and where the sites are located, well, schools can provide that. Schools are established in the community, we know where they are, they're easy to access. The data sort of confirms this. So if we look at the different types of meal sites by type of site, we know that schools serve more meals by volume than any other type of site, and as well as sort of this ADP, the average daily participation among sites. Again, the top of the list. So again, using data, with United Way, we were able to identify 7 high-need school districts that had especially low participation rates. So these are 7. They're mostly located in South King County, and one thing we know about these 7 school districts is that 2/3 of students are students of color, 60% are low income, and over 167 different languages are spoken at homes in these, where these students live. So really critical when we think about our approaches, it should sort of reflect this nuance. The other thing we know is that fewer than half of schools in these districts are operating meal sites. So again, a real area for growth moving forward. So some recommendations: creating new sites in that region, as well as ways to increase participation at existing sites. Some of those strategies are listed here. And if we take a look at the collective impact work, this is sort of the beginning of that work. My Hunger-Free Community Report is meant to synthesize sort of these theoretical ideas in the model and ask questions for providers about how they can really implement this work. So really focusing and initiating the building blocks of the collective impact model.
So taken together, these are the recommendations that Albert and I left behind in Washington. We're really excited to see them implement this work in the coming summer. And we'd like to leave you all with a few guiding principles. Again, considering that 9 out of 10 low-income youth, are not accessing this program, there's a lot of nuance in this number. And letting this nuance inform our guiding principles will ensure that those youth can access the program as well.